Hi everyone and welcome. Today we're joined by Max Blumenthal, the editor-in-chief at The Gray Zone. So welcome back to the program.
Great to see you, Glenn.
So we're now trying to get an overview of this aftermath of the war against Iran. Again, it's not really clear if it's actually over, but one of the key discussions I've noticed was who is using whom. That is, was this the Israeli tricking the United States into this, or is this the United States using Israel as a pawn? Now, it seems to be more evidence for the former, but I was wondering how you view this conflict.
Yeah, I think this kind of settled that argument. I don't know how anyone could argue the latter at this point. I mean, there was no popular support in the United States at all. It was almost the reverse of the post 9/11 sentiment, where a overwhelming majority, close to 90% of Americans, supported going into Afghanistan beyond just kind of a police action to go after al-Qaeda, the purported perpetrators of the attack. And then even as Bush made the case for Iraq, the whole mainstream media was manufacturing consent. The liberal class generally supported the war. You were in the you were kind of a pariah. And I remember that era very well, going to anti-war protests and just feeling like a pariah and being told to go back to Baghdad for protesting it. And then the reality of the war set in, and the American public flipped, and they never really came back. I wrote a book, The Management of Savagery, about how the United States, essentially the CIA, helped create al-Qaeda by funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and creating a basis for al-Qaeda to emerge, and then supporting them through various rat lines even in the 1990s, and basically paved the path for 9/11. The post 9/11 era and the humiliation of Iraq helped Donald Trump become president. And now Donald Trump has become what I call Orange McCain, as he has done what John McCain dreamed of, the most neocon sender of our generation, always dreamed of, in bombing Iran. And why did he do it? Well, I'm not just relying on public records here. And the US mainstream media has whitewashed the Israeli role in many ways. But Donald Trump, to the consternation of the intellectual architects of America First, Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, so many of the podcasters he relied on to win the young male vote, and the American public, which, according to a YouGov poll, supported the war at a rate of about 19%, supported bombing Iran at about 19%. Donald Trump didn't even make the case, as George W. Bush did, for going into Iran. He didn't even try to manufacture consent. And the only network that was doing that was Fox News, for like the older Republican boomer set. But inside the White House, what I learned through a White House or a administration source was that the Israelis, specifically Mossad Director David Barnea, along with figures like Ron Dermer, who's considered Netanyahu's brain, were going into briefings and also working the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, behind the scenes and presenting the hysterical WMD deceptions that were even more absurd than those presented to the American public in the run-up to the Iraq War, to the CIA director and to General Michael Kurilla, the commander of CENTCOM, who's considered Israel's favorite general. And they were just fully on board and presented the lies to the president, Trump, who then felt compelled to bomb Fordo, the Isfahan facility, and Natanz in order to basically get the Israelis off his back. There were other areas of pressure too, from Miriam Adelson, who's sort of a channel for Israeli influence in the US and the largest donor overall to Donald Trump. But it was mainly through these phony briefings and Donald Trump watching Fox News night after night that he felt compelled to do this bombing. And now it is blown back on him. and he is facing a scandal as U.S. intelligence has essentially confirmed what we already knew, what was clear, what Iran's government has said, and what was clear from Maxar satellite photos, which was that the Fordo facility was not destroyed and that Iran's 60% enriched uranium nuclear stockpile is still existent and somewhere in the country.
So, given this, historically large opposition to this war within the U.S. and the huge costs and risks of such an attack on Iran, combined with the low likelihood of success, why would Trump go through with this? Given that he ran on this anti-war platform, he split the America First movement. How is it just pure Israeli influence in terms of the lobby, or to what extent are these Mossad now in the White House? How can we understand how Israel then got Trump roped into this war?
Well, that's a big factor. And we published some reporting thanks to audio I obtained from an off-the-record AIPAC briefing for Congress. And, they brought their constituents in who lobby Congress to Washington. This was last winter, and I published the recording in April when it became clear to me that I had something on my hands that was provided to me by a participant in that meeting that I thought was significant, because it was April when the Trump administration first moved to bomb Iran, and that was under National Security Council Director Mike Waltz, who's significant here, but he's been, as we say in the U.S., busted down to traffic duty, and they basically made him U.S. ambassador to Iran because his colleagues outed him for coordinating secretly with Netanyahu. Then there was CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who I mentioned before, and there are some other figures who have been subjected to Israeli influence, who basically they see the world through the Israeli prism, the Israeli counter-terror prism, and many in the military do see it that way. So I mentioned Michael Kurilla. There's also General Dan Kane, who is the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon. And these two figures oversaw this campaign starting in March. We just learned, actually, through a Washington Post report, that the U.S. military put together this bombing campaign in March under Israeli pressure, because the Israelis said that Iran was rebuilding its anti-aircraft systems, and so they had a very short window of time. And I understood that an Israeli attack was coming, and it was understood when we were in Iran from diplomats I spoke to that an attack was coming. They just couldn't quite determine when. So in April, it failed, but I released this audio because I thought it was really significant from this AIPAC meeting, where the new CEO of AIPAC, Elliot Brand, is regaling his constituents about how he, a 30-year veteran of AIPAC, has cultivated all these members of the Trump administration who now control the national security apparatus. He named Marco Rubio, which was not a surprise. He also named Mike Waltz, and he named John Ratcliffe. And he said it all starts in Congress. These three figures all come from Congress, and we fund, I'm paraphrasing him, but we fund their elections. Like, we get them elected. We go down and meet with them. We make sure they get reelected on the condition that they basically see the world our way, the Israeli way. And John Ratcliffe, if you actually look into his history, you see someone who, it's sort of mystifying that he's CIA director. I mean, compared to past CIA directors like Robert Gates, who was supremely qualified for the job because he'd spent his life in military and intelligence, or even Leon Panetta, who'd been in an administration and dealt with intelligence matters before. John Ratcliffe was a small-town lawyer from a town of 7,000 outside Dallas. And then he spent most of his career as mayor of this tiny town. Then he comes into Congress, is immediately cultivated by AIPAC, does what AIPAC wants, and he also, when Trump gets elected in 2016, he becomes one of Trump's fiercest defenders against the whole Russiagate scam. So Trump just likes him, tries to put him at director of national intelligence, but he can't actually get into that position at first. Republican senators start pulling out support from John Ratcliffe because he had lied and claimed that he was a top prosecutor on probably the most politicized terror trial of the post 9/11 era, when a group of Palestinian American kind of Muslim community leaders from Dallas were put on trial for sending charity to the Gaza Strip. They were accused of, being at the forefront of this Hamas terror nexus. It was a completely bogus case. They're all still in jail, mostly for life. And during that trial, actually, the Mossad brought one of its agents to testify under an assumed identity. The courtroom was cleared, so it turned into a secret courtroom, and he presented secret evidence, which the jury then believed because they couldn't get a conviction on the first trial. Anyway, it was very notable that Ratcliffe pretended to be a prosecutor on this Mossad-directed trial in the U.S., gets reappointed to DNI in 2020 at the end of the Trump first term. Then he comes back as CIA director because Trump wants to just surround himself with complete loyalists, not realizing that Ratcliffe is actually also loyal to Israel. And he becomes the key briefer for Israel, described to me by a Trump administration official as Mossad's stenographer. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence now, who has this background as a kind of an anti or non-interventionist, who switched parties and has displayed incredible loyalty to Trump and a willingness to bend intelligence to suit his political agenda, is basically not allowed in these meetings any longer. She was not allowed into a Camp David meeting where Ratcliffe presented this sports metaphor to try to convince Trump to bomb Iran, basically saying the Israelis had run the ball down to the 1-yard line. I know you don't have NFL football where you are. Basically, they almost score, but you're not allowing them to run the ball into the end zone. And you have to run it into the end zone, Trump. This is like stuff that Trump's brain can supposedly digest. Tulsi Gabbard wasn't allowed to be there. Then Trump comes out and denounces Tulsi Gabbard when asked about her March briefing before Congress, where she presents the fact that every previous director of national intelligence since 2012 has presented the national intelligence assessment that Iran is not set to produce a nuclear weapon, that Iran does not possess one, it has no nuclear weapons program. It could potentially produce one in several months, but it doesn't have the intention to do so. And Trump said, I don't care what Tulsi Gabbard thinks. I mean, that's when I knew that the bombing was going to have to take place. So the bombing takes place. Trump markets it as it's like some Top Gun public relations stunt where they drop the mother of all bombs. And, Trump's base, the part of his base that supported this strike, they don't even care if the nuclear stockpile gets destroyed. They just want to see a Muslim country, a defiant Muslim country, get smacked in the face. And that's what Trump gave them. 2 days ago, Trump tweeted out an AI video taking the song Barbara Ann by the Beach Boys, R.I.P. Brian Wilson, and changing it to the tune of Bomb Iran, invoking John McCain's infamous and disgusting rendition of the Bomb Iran song when he was senator, which is so crazy because Trump had run as the anti-McCain. He had even mocked John McCain and called him a coward who only flew in a plane and never saw combat duty. And, a lot of people who served in Iraq really appreciated that. So Trump basically is channeling the legacy of the neocon McCain. But if you actually listen to the lyrics of the AI song, it's very racist. It's very Islamophobic. They're talking about going to the mosque. They're going to throw a rock. It's more about humiliating Muslims and humiliating Iran than actually destroying the nuclear stockpile. And I think that's what satiates the psyche of the MAGA base, or at least part of it. But the reality is that Trump failed to destroy the nuclear stockpile. He's under attack from the liberal press, the mainstream press for that. And he's back to the same dynamic of Russiagate, where he's saying, you're fake news. These are, they are many of the same characters who are being recycled to pump out intelligence assessments that are leaked from the bowels of the so-called deep state. The Defense Intelligence Agency has 2 officials leaking this document showing that Fordo is not destroyed and that the nuclear stockpile is still out there. And it's Natasha Bertrand who was responsible for bogus stories during Russiagate. She was a channel for bogus stories from the IC. So Trump is playing on the same dynamic. And I'm standing back watching this, and it's so obvious to me that the intelligence assessments here are actually correct because we have so many other pieces of evidence to corroborate them with. But the intention behind it may be the same as those that drove the Russiagate narrative, which is to push Trump to more hawkish and belligerent action. Because Trump sees this as a one-off strike that he did just to mollify the Israelis. And to the extent that Iran's nuclear program was not destroyed and Trump's strike failed, pressure will increase from not only the Democrats, but also from within the Republican Party, from Republican senators and members of Congress cultivated by AIPAC, for Trump to go back in or allow Israel to go back in and finish the job he failed to complete. So it's very dangerous politically. It's a very dangerous political environment right now in Washington. I think Trump is being baited to go back in. The Israelis have said that this phase is not over and that they intend to go back into some capacity, probably within the realm of the gray zone where they have some deniability. But the ceasefire that Trump orchestrated, which he thought would be some kind of diplomatic masterstroke, will not hold.
Yeah, well, you did call the strike, though. I remember before we went to Iran, which was last month, I asked you when the strike, well, if it would come when we were there, and now I remember you, suggesting it would come later. But I guess, to a large extent, it was predictable, given that Israel saw an opportunity to weaken, if not knock out Iran, even though I think that was a bit overly optimistic on Israel's side. You mentioned that Trump wanted to get Netanyahu off his back and, mollify the Israelis. Do you see this as being the reason behind the strike, the attacking the nuclear facilities, and also, I guess, allowing Iran to then retaliate against the U.S. military base in Qatar in order for, I guess, the conflict to come to a natural end? But was this seen as now? Well, why did Trump go through all of this? Was it seen as a mistake to start the war to begin with, or because did Trump give a green light to Israel to begin with to start this war with Iran?
Well, definitely, Trump greenlit the Israeli attack.
But he thought it was going to be a knockout blow, or what? What were this? Did it change his mind thereafter, or how did this work?
He may not have understood how he would be drawn into a much larger conflict. I mean, my understanding of Trump's thinking is, first of all, I think the paradoxical component here is that Trump and, I would assume, Rubio, Secretary of State, saw Iran correctly as the adult in the room that could be counted on to retaliate in a sort of symbolic way in order to restore its dignity and demonstrate some deterrence against the U.S. without going too far. And Iran demonstrated that with the attack on the Al Udeid base, giving warning to Qatar. Then Qatar came in as the diplomatic negotiator. I mean, this has been confirmed by the emir's diplomats that Trump called them and said, we want you to initiate a ceasefire now. They did so. And what Trump thought he was going to do was give each side the ability to claim victory, including himself, the U.S., through his kind of porn-themed Operation Midnight Hammer, where, Iran just got demolished. And then he would call it a day. Steve Bannon, Trump's former chief of staff, who's been one of the chief critics of Trump falling into the Israeli trap, has said this is a one-off, we're not going back. This is what Trump thinks. This is the dynamic he believes he has engineered, and he believes he has control. Pakistan nominated Trump for a Nobel Prize just about 24 hours before the U.S. struck Iran. So Trump thinks that by engineering this ceasefire and giving each side the ability to claim victory, he has possibly won a Nobel Prize. And that's what he really wants. Trump didn't want to be a war president. I don't think he personally supported striking Iran. And he certainly doesn't support an open-ended conflict with a regional power like Iran that would plunge his presidency into complete chaos and ruin. He's mentally lazy. He wants to be liked. He wants to be liked by everyone, including the Iranians, including the Ukrainians, including the Russians. He wants to be seen as a historic world leader, but he doesn't realize that while Iran has been the adult in the room, there is a psychotic stepchild that's been in the attic, coming out every once in a while to cause destruction in the house, and that's Israel. And Israel is not going to allow this ceasefire to stand. They've said so, and they will do everything they can to prevent Iran from recovering its air defenses and its deterrence. They did do significant damage to Iran's ballistic missile launchers. I mean, they claim they have destroyed 50%. I doubt it's that high, but we saw video with, it confirmed these weren't like decoys, like there was cook-off, where they were hitting Iranian launchers before they could deploy, like in Yazd, for example. And this led Iran to launch more kind of hit-and-run attacks where you would see shorter volleys than the one that initially Iran responded with during True Promise 3. They also did significant damage to Iran's air defenses, but they will be able to repair it all. And possibly through Iranian cooperation with China, as we saw with Pakistan, actually do significantly improve its radar and anti-aircraft defense systems. That's what I assume is taking place as Iran's defense minister meets with Chinese and Russian counterparts. So Israel's in a race against time. But Donald Trump has unlocked, he's opened a Pandora's box here. He doesn't quite understand what he's done. But I think that, later on in his final term, this will come back to haunt him.
But in order for Israel to then end the ceasefire and restart the war, and not only restart it, but to pull America into this, because it does appear Israel would need the assistance of the United States in terms of the weaponry and, also its fighting power. But wouldn't Israel first need to crush the claim of Trump that the nuclear facilities were completely demolished? Because if you accept the premise that they were demolished, then the reason for the war is over, as J.D. Vance said, in awkwardness. So we're not at war with Iran, we're at war with their nuclear program. Now, let's say we buy into that argument, then they would first have to destroy that position before they're able to pull America back into this.
Yeah, and I think it's important to watch J.D. Vance, because my understanding is that he was the key figure in the administration in making this a one-off strike and engineering the ceasefire, and he really wants it to stick, and he wants this to be his legacy because he will inherit the mantle of Trump. And you're right. This attack on Trump, which is based on real intelligence, unlike Russiagate, for not destroying Fordo and not eliminating the stockpile, as Iran moves to prevent IAEA inspectors from entering, because they have clearly collaborated with the Israelis and the Americans. Rafael Grossi's performance has been odious. He's colluded to make this war possible, and Iran potentially leaving the NPT, it will put more pressure on Donald Trump to go back in. So it's kind of, I mean, I want to kind of mock the Trump administration for launching this strike and failing. But at the same time, I kind of want their their narrative to stick, because it means Iran will be left alone and there can be international cooperation again. But that's not where Israel wants to go. And we can actually hear it from Israeli pundits. One Israeli pundit on I-24, Israel Channel 24, just launched into a rant about 3 days ago, declaring that, Trump had failed and that the only way is to blow it up from the inside, and that, what they've done is disastrous because the Trump administration, it's going to be that much harder to get the Trump administration in the U.S. to attack again.
Well, I'm hoping this fake victory will stick as well to the point, it allows the ceasefire to continue. Anyways, Max Blumenthal, thank you so much